Well, hello friends. Welcome to the SerenityOS update for September 2022. It's been another nice month in the project. We've had about 1,000 commits from around 70 people or so, and people are working all across the project. So the operating system, but also on the Ladybird browser and the Jakt programming language. And we've got stuff from all of those things to show you today. So let's get started. The first thing I want to mention today is that I made a blog post about the Ladybird browser. Now, the browser itself has already been around for a while, and you've probably seen it in these monthly update videos, but I decided to make a personal commitment to taking it more seriously. So I made a blog post about how I've added to my personal goals to build a cross-platform web browser, not just a browser for SerenityOS. And although this post was meant as a kind of just a personal announcement, people around the web really enjoyed it. So I got a ton of messages and I spoke to a bunch of people about it. And I also did an interview with a German magazine, and I'll put a link to that in the video description if you want to check that out. But basically, it's just describing what Ladybird is and what I think of it going forward, what my motivations are, and so on. And it ended with a little screenshot here just to temper people's expectations. So this is what Reddit looked like when I wrote the post. And in the time since I wrote the post, I've worked a bit on Reddit. So now it actually looks quite a bit better in Ladybird. Although, of course, there are still issues, but we're making progress. All right, let's look at some new things in the Jakt programming language this month. The first thing I want to show you is inherited fields. So JT and I have been working on inheritance support for classes. So if we now make a base class that has a field, let's make that public actually, and we inherit from this base class, then when we instantiate the inherited subclass, we can now instantiate fields in the base class as well. So it goes a little something like this. So there you go. And then, of course, those fields are accessible and access controls are checked and everything. So that if you have a function here that looks something like this, then it will do what you expect. If I make it public, so I can call it from the outside. There we go. And let's see how we would compile that actually. So that would be, okay. Then I think the binary goes, where does the binary go? Build. There we go. Yes. So that's new this month, inherited fields, and the ergonomics around construction are still not where they should be, but it's a work in progress. Another feature I want to show you is else bindings. So this is something that Rob did, which I really like, and it goes a bit something like this. So say that you have an enum with, you know, some typical enum fields, like, well, maybe a koala. And then you want to match on this enum. And then maybe you have something interesting to do in the cat case here. So do something interesting here, like we greet the cat with a special greeting, like meow. All right. And for other cases, we don't really have something specific to do with dog or koala. So we want to bring them into an else, but until now, it was not possible to bind anything with else. But now we can. So if we have name as a common field between all the remaining variants of the enums, so we can actually bind it with else now and just say hello. There we go. And yeah, so this was implemented by Rob, and it's subtle, but when you see it, it just makes so much sense. So thank you very much, Rob, for working on that. So something else I wanted to call out was Ali has been doing a whole bunch of work on multiple translation units. So this is personally something I'm really excited about. Basically, until now, we have been compiling everything as a single CBP file. So even if you had multiple Jakt files, like our compiler, for example, it consists of many .jakt files. But when we compile it, we would just spit out one big CBP file and then hand that to the C++ compiler. But now, thanks to the work of Ali, we make individual CBP files for each of these modules, which is then a lot easier to parallelize. So build times are down substantially this month, which is really, really great. So thank you very much, Ali, for working on that. And finally, something that's ongoing, not quite finished, but super awesome, is code formatting. So again, something Ali has been working on, and I know JT has been helping as well. We now have auto formatting for code, although it's not hooked up in the IDE here yet, but I can run it on the file I just wrote, for example. Or actually, that was the file I previously wrote. Here it is. So as you can see, it just takes a Jakt file as input and then produces a auto-formatted, normalized output. There are a couple of little things that are remaining before we can make it a requirement to run it, and we can make it part of CI and everything. But it does a lot of neat stuff, like remove unnecessary semicolons and other bad habits. Very, very exciting. So super, super nice to have code formatting coming in. Anyway, so let's look at Serenity itself. This is the September edition of the SerenityOS desktop, looking pretty familiar. So something that's new this month, which I actually complained about in the last monthly update video, is an improved emoji picker. So last time I showed you all the new emojis we had and how they wouldn't fit in the emoji picker, but just escape off screen. And Tim stepped up and wrote a new emoji picker that has built-in scrolling. So we can now actually pick emojis. They don't run away from us. So this is pretty fancy. It has built-in search here, so I can type Ladybug, for example, or maybe it's Lady Beetle, the official name of it. Yeah, there you go. And search as you type. Pretty cool. It also shows the different categories and allows you to pick from them. So very, very impressive. And thank you to Tim for building this emoji picker. And also about emojis, I think we have like 450 new emojis this month, and many of the old ones have been redrawn or improved as well. So I know that Jecha, Joel, Beckett, Brandon, Dennis, and Ryan have been hard at work on making emojis, and maybe somebody else as well. I forget, sorry about that. But thank you all for working on the emojis. It's really cool to see just so many of them coming into place in the system. It's something I never thought we would have, and it's just flourishing. So thank you all for working on that. Oh, and by the way, there's also an insert emoji action here. We had the global shortcut before Control-Alt-Space, but Brandon added this shortcut, which I really like because it makes the insertion command a lot more discoverable, like the fact that it is now in the menus. So thank you, Brandon, for doing that. And something else GUI related this month is we now have rubber band selection in table views. Previously, it only worked in icon views, but Network Exception went and implemented it for table views and for column views. So here as well, it works. And it feels really cool because it doesn't just mimic exactly how the icon view variant works. where you can sort of select arbitrary rectangles. But here, it's sort of a fixed width rectangle, which makes sense because it's fixed width information, but it just feels so nifty when you use it. So thank you, Network Exception, for working on that. And some little things. I know that we now have a feature in the Magnifier that allows you to save a snapshot. So let me save a snapshot right there. And we can look at it. I guess that's probably a snapshot of me saving, which makes sense. This feature was added by Roberto, and I think there should be a way to pause the capture, right? Yeah. So you can press space like this, and then it sticks, right? So you don't have to only save snapshots of you clicking the save button, which is what would happen otherwise, but you can, oh, there's a little bug. You can pause the capture by pressing space. So make sure to do that if you're gonna save Magnifier snapshots. But thank you, Roberto, for implementing that. That's very cool. Oh, and something that is very little, but I really like, is if you start web server, it will open up a just a simple HTTP server that you can connect to with our browser. And now this little message here has a clickable link that you can just open in the browser by double clicking on it. And it's subtle, but it's so elegant. I just love it. And this was done by Network Exception as well. How cool is that? Thank you, Network Exception, for thinking of this excellent tiny little thing. And the last GUI thing I wanted to show you is in the settings. So we now have calendar settings, which it was implemented by Olivier. And just the things you can do right now is you can select what's the first day of the week, you know, in your culture, whatever you prefer, you can have it your way. And you can also switch between if you want a monthly view or a yearly view when you start up the calendar application. So thank you, Olivier, for adding calendar settings. And I think, yeah, you can now also right click here to get to the clock settings, although I forget who added that. Maybe it was Tim, but whoever did that, thank you. That's neat. Oh, by the way, since we are nearby the time zone area, something that Tim did this month, which I really appreciated because it was killing performance for me on a website, was that we now generate time zone offset information for daylight savings time. We generate that information at compile time. So previously, when you wanted to figure out the current local time, we had to go and find out like the current daylight savings time state by doing a bunch of math. And now we do all that at compile time instead. So it's a super trivial arithmetic at runtime instead of pretty heavy loops. So that was really nice. Thank you, Tim, for doing that. Anyway, now we are going to let Linus tell us what's new in the web stack.
All right, let's have a look at all the JavaScript engine and browser changes from the last month. And let's start in a JS REPL here, because David has done some work on JS date parsing. So you might be familiar with the old date constructor, hopefully soon to be replaced by temporal in all the major browsers, but we're not quite there yet. And so this, according to the ECMAScript specification, only supports a very limited subset of date strings. But historically, browsers have been happy to accept much more than that. And sort of some websites rely on non-standard strings to be accepted here. And we found one of those websites. And so now we support a string like 10/20/2022. And that's going to give you October 2022. So this is the US date format here, and that was a real-life website needing that. So sometimes you need to just ignore the spec and just match reality. David has also done something very interesting, which I'm going to show you in the browser because I don't have it running locally. But he actually ported our test262 runner that I initially developed in a separate repository and then slowly started upstreaming. And he ported that to Serenity itself. So it's now possible to build it and run it in this VM, for example. And here you can see it took a while, but he got some results. So this is really cool work, and hopefully we can retire that separate repository really soon. So great work from David. What else? David did some work on modules as well, just fixing some compliance issues. For example, stuff like export with an empty object. So export nothing from modules. So this is perfectly legal and now supported. And he just handled a bunch of edge cases like that, which is always nice to get the full spec compliance. And then Tim did some work on Intel number format, doing some updates there where they changed some stuff upstream. And then lastly, I want to show you a code change, wrong text editor. So Andreas introduced these templates called GCPtr and NonnulGCPtr. And now there's not a lot of magic to them. They are just wrappers around a C++ reference, or in the case of the nullable one, a C++ reference or pointer. But the great thing about those is that we can kind of stop returning raw pointers and raw references everywhere and have a very clear indicator that this type is managed by the JavaScript heap and would be garbage collected if you don't take care to visit it during the garbage collection, because in the past that has been a common issue or a common source of bugs where you have a garbage collected type and then you forget to hold on to it and it just suddenly disappears before you expect it to. And so hopefully this gives us visibility into that, and later on could also enable compile time or static introspection into whether we actually do visit all members that are a GC pointer, for example. So this is pretty nice and hopefully will be used a lot more soon. Let's move on to the browser then. And we are starting with a README here, which is a Markdown file. So in case you didn't know that, the browser supports rendering Markdown. So under the hood, this is just a regular Markdown file that then gets rendered to HTML. So if we, don't know if we can view source here, but that's also how it works in the text editor preview when you render, when you have text on the left side and it renders a preview on the right side. And so new this month is images scaling to fit the browser view here. So previously we would render them at full size. So this image is much larger and then would like go outside of the viewport. But now they automatically shrink to fit, which is really nice. So if we make this window small, you can still see the whole image. And this is important because in Markdown, you don't really get to style the content yourself much. So you really have to rely on the program that displays your content to take care of that. And so Sam implemented this very nice change. So thank you, Sam. And they also support toggling between the full size and the scaled size. So you can still get a larger image if you want to. Let's see what else. So this is the plain old welcome page, but if we look at a JavaScript console here, you can see something new, which is two messages, hello from an inline script in the head of welcome.html, and hello from DOM content loaded. And so this is important because previously we would just ignore any Console.Log messages before a certain point. So the console was set up quite late in the page loading process. And as a result, stuff like inline scripts in the head would not show up in the console anywhere. So you had a Console.Log and it would just disappear. So this is really nice and fixing a long-standing issue where, yeah, the console was kind of unreliable, honestly. So thank you, David, for that. And let's see, let's open up a console again, because Sam did some work on formatting. So if you didn't know, you can, in Console.Log or Console.info or any of these, you can specify a format string, for example, %C, which stands for CSS. And then you just type anything here. And then you pass a second argument, which is a valid CSS string. So for example, color blue. And as you can see, this is now styled with CSS. And so this is supported by various browsers. It's very poorly spec'd. So Sam sort of did his best to make an implementation that is comparable to other browsers. We only support a single format specifier here so far. So you cannot style hello and friends in different colors yet, but that could be something someone wants to work on in the future. So it's already a great start. And this is often used by websites if they want to highlight some important thing in the console. For example, popular websites printing out a message that someone pointing you to the console might want to scam you or something like that, steal your data, whatever. So this is nice. What else? Let's see. Oh, while we are in the console, two more things. So we have some work on web APIs every month, and I cannot showcase all of them because many of them are just like very small, not really demo able. But Luke has been working on something called document.domain, which, as you might guess, just prints out the current document's URL domain, which in this case is an empty string because we load from a local file. But if we were, for example, visit SerenityOS.org/something, and then that would print out SerenityOS.org, which many websites use to sort of, for example, build a full API URL based on some relative URL and their domain name. And the network exception implemented a very strange API called window.length, which is not very obvious, but it returns the number of iframes on the current web page. So in this case, we're on the start page, we don't have any, but let's see. Here's a page with an iframe. So if we do this again, we get 2. Because apparently there's 2 iframes on this page. So this is really funny. You should not use that, but it's still out there in the wild, so we definitely need to support it. Now a very big change. So Andreas did a lot of work to make everything in the browser, or most things in the browser, GC allocated. And so what that means is that under the hood, we now have something called platform object, and all the regular JS objects will inherit from that. And previously we would have a ref counted C++ object and then generate a bindings JavaScript object for it that sort of wraps the inner object. And so really every object would have an internal implementation and sort of a JavaScript shell. And that just added like a lot of overhead, a lot of more memory use, and most importantly, ref count cycles. So some stuff would just never get collected and memory use would go up and never down. And so this is now essentially fixed by just moving all the objects to the JS heap. And from there, they can then get garbage collected once nothing needs them anymore. So this took a lot of work, and also ties into the GC pointers that I showed you earlier. So we have better visibility over this, and it's just overall a really nice change. Took a long time to get here, but we finally did it. And of course, Andreas worked on everything across the browser stack, from layout, better font support, CSS flex, floating layout, various web APIs. So as usual, Andreas, really good work on this. Definitely check out some of the browser hacking videos that he did as well. There's some interesting stuff there. Let's see, what else do we got? Right, so also new this month is support for the CSS property backdrop filter, which is not entirely new in the browser world, but was not widely supported for quite a while. So it's still not extremely widespread in use, but we support it now. So as you can see, this is an element overlaying the image, and the element on top of the image has a backdrop filter, so it applies a filter to the element beneath it. In this case, for example, scaling, blurring, a filter. And so we can look at the source here. No, not JS console. Right, so as you can see, all the way down here, we make an image box and then a backdrop. And let's check that out. So the backdrop box has backdrop filter, grayscale, invert, and blur 5 pixels applied. And as you can see, it does that. And some of them scale, and yeah, you can scale them up, scale them down, apply different opacity. It all just works. And so Magnifier implemented this, and since Magnifier also implemented a bunch of other things in recent weeks and months, like background images with border radius, or combining these beautiful shadows into these funny X structures here. We now have a demo page showcasing all of this, including a nice background gradient. So it's really nice to just see all the progress on one page, because it really has been a lot of progress recently in regards to these very fancy effects, so things that make an average web page look like a bit more special, and I really like that. So great work by Magnifier here. And then lastly, we have some work on CSS Grid. So Martin has gone and implemented some more of this. He already started this 1 or 2 months ago. And so, for example, we now have this grid with 4 regions here, and then in one of the corners you have sort of a subgrid, if you will, which is itself divided in 4 sections. So you can actually get quite advanced with this now, and it will hopefully help us to render websites that use CSS Grid natively in their proper layout. So hopefully more progress on this soon. And then lastly, I have done some more work on the Fetch API. So a while ago, I already worked on some infrastructure bits and the header object. So headers, so you can make like a regular HTTP header, key to value mappings. Nothing crazy there. But we now also support request and response, which are sort of the underlying JavaScript objects where you can pass a billion different options and tweak the request and sort of interpret the response in different ways. For example, you could make a new response and then pass like a string here. And then we should be able to say .json, which will interpret that body as a JSON string. And then we should be able to Console.Log that. And indeed, as you can see, it made a response. The JSON created a promise, and then once that was resolved, it logged 1, 2, 3, and now that is passed as JSON. So if we pass, for example, an invalid string here, you can see it just never resolves because there's an error in the background, and we could catch that with a different error handler here. So still no actual fetch function, but I think we are very close now. And that is all. So nothing more to show you. Back to Andreas.
And that's everything we had to show you here today. So thank you so much for checking in and staying up to date with our project. And big thanks to Linus for co-hosting with me. Make sure you subscribe to Linus here on YouTube for more SerenityOS content. If you want to come chat, join the Discord server. There's a link to it in the video description. And I also have a weekly live stream here on YouTube. It's every Friday at 4 p.m. Swedish time. It's called the SerenityOS Office Hours, and everybody's welcome to ask whatever you want to know about SerenityOS or the related family of projects. Finally, if you would like to sponsor development of these projects, you can find donation options for some of our developers in the video description as well. I'm working on this full-time since May of last year, thanks to the generous support of so many awesome people, and it's just going beautifully. So thank you all so much for supporting me and allowing me to continue working on this this thing, whatever it is, wherever it's going. It's amazing. Thank you so much. And yeah, that's it for today. So see you next time.